You can come and knock on our door, get screened for dyslexia for free and get a cup of tea. You can come and knock on our door and we'll teach you to read. Lord Harrington's on the call, and he's been down before to give out certificates for people that have learned to read. Lord Harrington met a lady who was a nun who couldn't read and write, who came about 7 years ago. And we taught her to read through support from the Sainsbury's Family Trust. And she contacted me 2 weeks ago, and she's now at university, and she's looking for a copy of a dyslexia assessment we did 7 years ago, because she's gone from a non-reader to, you know, a university person that's going to hopefully ultimately graduate.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Dyslexia in Working Age Adults inquiry session. My name is Michelle Catterson, and I am head teacher of Moonhall School, which is a specialist school for dyslexic children. So all of my pupils are dyslexic. But I also have another responsibility as well, in that I am chair of the British Dyslexia Association's Board of Trustees. It is my pleasure today to chair this inquiry session, and I would like to introduce you to our expert panellists. Today we have David Williams, Director of Inclusion at the Park Academies Trust. We have Dr. Deborah Leveroy, Neurodiversity and Inclusion Lead at the Dyslexia Box. We also have Nassir, the CEO of Microlink, and we have Steve O'Brien, founder and CEO of the Dyslexic Foundation. So welcome to our expert panellists, and I can't wait to hear your opinions on this really important topic. Our topic today is hugely important. And we know this because many people in the workplace struggle every day in order to get the help that they need due to their dyslexia. We hope from this inquiry session that we can not only probe a little deeper into the impact that this lack of support has, but also to consider some strategies and support that could be implemented by employers in order to support their dyslexic employees. As the Equality Act of 2010 states, reasonable adjustments should be made for those with a recognised disability, and we know that dyslexia falls within that criteria. We know that those with dyslexia are at a disadvantage when compared to their non-dyslexic colleagues. The emotional impact on the individuals who experience a lack of understanding and support can affect all aspects of their life. Those in the workplace who have not had access to support and reasonable adjustments being implemented may experience isolation, mental health issues, and a lack of career progression due to their skills and qualities not being identified. So the first thing I would like to do is enable our panellists to say a little bit more about themselves and their experience, and I would like to invite David to start off the process.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So my name is David Williams. At the moment, my job role is I'm Director of Inclusion for an Education Trust. We've got a number of schools. It's called the Park Academies Trust, and we go from nursery right up to 18. We've got specialist provision and mainstream schools. My interest in dyslexia is largely because I'm dyslexic myself. So I struggled quite significantly as I went through school. I didn't learn to read effectively until I was about 14, by which time I was predicted to fail all of my GCSEs. I was lucky enough to scrape C grades across the board. I then went on into A levels and got straight A's, got my undergrad degree and a master's from Oxford. So my trajectory was not a normal trajectory. From a dyslexia in the workplace point of view, when I left university, I went and worked at Intel, which was a fascinating company to work for. And I remember very clearly within the first few weeks, the head of IT for the Greater European region, in a meeting, he said that people should be reading for content, not for spelling. And that actually it's far more to listen to what people have to say than how they say it necessarily, and that's stuck with me. At the moment, we've got somewhere in the region of about 500 staff within our trust. And as I've progressed through my career from a classroom teacher up to the board level, exec board level, what I've tended to discover is that the higher I get, and I'm very open about being dyslexic, the more other staff in the trust talk about their dyslexia. And that's also stuck with me. So I continue to talk about disability openly and ways that we can support staff and both at work but also in their lives in general. I think that's probably enough for me. If I pass on to whoever's next.
Thank you, David. Deborah, can I ask you to go next, please? Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks very much for inviting me to participate in this. So my name's Dr. Deborah Leveroy. I'm the Neurodiversity and Inclusion Lead at Dyslexia Box. We're a workplace adjustment provider, and we support organisations, teams and individuals through coaching, training, consultancy and assistive technology. One of my roles as part of Dyslexia Box is to work with organisations and teams and to develop their neurodiversity strategy and best practice, and also to collaborate with research centres as an industry partner. Previously, I worked as a disability advisor and a needs assessor at the BBC on the Remploy contract, and also for PAM Occupational Health in the civil service, and as a study skills tutor on the DSA at universities and also drama schools. My PhD is in Dyslexia, Inclusion and Performer Training from the University of Kent. So I'm just going to kind of give you a few kind of an overview, if you like, of the kind of things that we see as a workplace adjustment provider, kind of themes that I'm sure will be picked up later on in the panel discussion. Two themes. One is obviously around the workplace adjustment process. The other is around organisational responses to dyslexia in the workplace. So when we think about workplace adjustments, what we find is that often these are kind of add-on or individualised responses. So, for example, we might bring an organisation might bring in coaching or assistive technology, and as potentially, transformative as they can be, they don't necessarily require the employer or the team members to kind of adapt it, in themselves. So when we're thinking about reasonable adjustments, we know that we need to be thinking about anticipatory adjustments and making sure that we're following kind of the principle of universal design. And in relation to dyslexia, examples of this might be an organisation having a site licence for assistive technology. So rather than that individual having to go through a potentially lengthy process of applying for funding, installing software, it's already there. So you're removing those barriers. Other examples might be, for example, a workplace preference questionnaire where you're asking all employees, so not just dyslexic, not just with a neuro difference, but you're asking all employees how they prefer to work, what their preferred communication style is, what is their preferred kind of environment. I should just say that although we're talking about dyslexia, obviously we know that co-occurrence is the norm, not the exception. So I'll just kind of say that we're talking about dyslexia, but also there's co-occurrence with other neuro differences to consider. I think another thing that we notice as a workplace adjustment provider is that often adjustments are put in as a kind of performance management, as part of a performance management process, often when there is a problem or a crisis. And therefore those adjustments are kind of weighted with emotional stuff, because that person is now going through a disciplinary procedure, and therefore, of course, those adjustments are then put under stress. I think that the other thing that we notice often is that process, the workplace adjustment process, is inconsistent. So there's not necessarily inconsistent within organisations and between them. Within organisations, there's a lot of kind of individuals involved, but there's no necessarily joined up process often. So you might have, for example, occupational health, facilities, health and safety, access to work, the line manager, and the fact that adjustments are sometimes put in a kind of health and safety side is kind of odd, because adjustments aren't health and safety, they're a kind of it's just equality essentially. I think there's also a question around using occupational health services for dyslexia. As amazing as occupational health services are, from the feedback that we receive, they do have a lot of expertise, of course, in disability more broadly and physical disability. But when it comes particularly to dyslexia or other neuro differences, those individuals' experiences of going down an occupational health route tend to be quite disappointing. So I think that's something that could be looked at further. Access to work, there's lots of positives. You know, we know that there's few comparable schemes globally. In the last year, 2021, it supported 36,000 people, 12% of which were dyslexic. But there are challenges. Currently, we all know there's at least a 6-month wait from the point of application to even getting a call from an advisor. In a way, this is good news. This means that more people know about access to work, and it's more, it's being used potentially more. Obviously, it looks like it's maybe under-resourced at the moment. We also hear from our contacts that there's been an increase in applicants with ADHD for various reasons. So that's quite interesting. And then lastly, just a few points on organisational responses. So we can see that disability is generally a hidden kind of category, if you like, within the diversity and inclusion space. And there's a lack of kind of neurodiversity or disability policy, both within D&I and also within people management. There's also examples of some exclusionary practices, unintentional, such as behavioural frameworks. But on the positive side, we see that there's obviously a growing interest in dyslexia in the workplace. There's been an increase in Google searches for neurodiversity in work and dyslexia in work by quite a significant number. I don't have that figure on me now, but I can get it. And also there's a lot of articles in the HR press, and that there's a lot of toolkits being developed. So these are all really positive signs. Just to end on a couple of positive examples, the BBC design and engineering team have put together a couple of films. I'm sure hopefully you guys are all familiar with, or you will be now. One is A Day in the Life, which is an interactive film to give people that lived experience of what it might be like. So that might be something that an organisation uses in terms of, you know, as part of their training. We also personally, as a business, are getting more inquiries from diversity and inclusion professionals who kind of really want that knowledge and want that support with their neurodiversity policies. There's a lot of neurodiversity recruitment initiatives that have been publicised in the press, EY, GCHQ. And I guess lastly is that point around the business case. So a lot of businesses are now developing that business case. Why should we hire neurodivergent talent? The cynic in me thinks you shouldn't have to have a business case. It's kind of obvious, but obviously it's a business and they need to frame it in that way. So obviously there's more to say. I'll hand over. My last concluding point, which I hope we'll talk about, is the current narrative around the kind of untapped talent or competitive advantage that we see in the press. And I think it'd just be interesting to explore that, which is potentially, I think, at odds with people's lived experience, and also, of course, with the employment rates. So yeah, on that note, I will hand over. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deborah. Nassir.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm Nassir Siabi. I'm the Chief Executive of Microlink. I co-founded the company 30 years ago, exactly 30 years ago today. So what we have done for this time, we've helped up to 500,000 disabled people, both in education and in workplace. For the past 30 years, we worked in the Disabled Student Allowance. We were the first company actually to start working in a very organized way. And obviously that has grown to be probably the best scheme ever anywhere in the world by size and by outcome. Then we've also worked in the workplace in the past 10 years. We have supported some of the largest multinational companies provide what we've now coined phrase, which is now becoming global recognition, is a workplace adjustment rather than reasonable adjustment. Because what we tend to find is employers always need a proof why somebody needs to have an intervention. It's like treating dyslexia as a disease. We're not there to cure a dyslexic person. We're here to remove barriers. So our job is very much become experts in identifying what barriers people face, whether it's in school or a university or a workplace, and offer very simple solutions. And often it comes down to assistive technologies, but as Deborah pointed out, it involves coaching. It involves actually understanding the kind of things they can't do and help them to do it better. And the business case is already built into that narrative, because when people underperform in their job, the productivity falls, and they get brought under performance management, it really is a matter of just providing them the right tools and the right environment, and they would outperform their peers. So that's something we've managed to demonstrate over the years using quite a very reputable partnership with our Business Disability Forum in a good sort of a case study, which is used globally. Any company who wants to do a workplace adjustment, they immediately refer to Lloyds Banking Group. That's the kind of case study we've worked with at BDF over 3 years, and we produced thousands of data to prove that anyone with any condition could be helped in a workplace, and it could be done very cheaply. We're talking about average costs of about £600-700 per individual, and we could get productivity improvements of more than 50%, particularly with those with the neurodiversity. Why is it so important today to talk about neurodiversity and dyslexia in particular? Is that the country is suffering through productivity. I mean, everyone acknowledges our biggest problem that the economy is facing is not underemployment or overemployment. It's just that people are not less productive. Mental health is also playing a big part, and that could be exactly what Deborah pointed out. People, if they have to struggle to do their job, it will impact their mental health. And giving the right solutions to people who do suffer from the barriers, whether it's due to work design or whether it's because of our education, that will certainly impact the performance because of the mental health and the anxieties and the depression it brings. So by fixing this problem, we also fix multiple other areas of the kind of individual's health. Our core really mission is to enable every individual, regardless of what disabilities or conditions they have, to be able to do their job, to be successful, to achieve the kind of full potential. And we find that that really has to go back to education. That's where we find the biggest impact on children with learning disabilities. Dyslexia is obviously the vast proportion of that. Also, even in the university sector, where more than 50% of the applicants for DSA are dyslexic, we really need to look at the core reasons why they're failing, fix it at source so that the problem doesn't end up in employment. But nevertheless, the technology advancements over the past many years, particularly what's built into your everyday device, could be a tool to help every individual to fulfill what they are capable of and to stop them underachieving. And by that, you have a knock-on effect of their confidence building, as well as their capability of doing any job given to them. So I hope today we will discuss that wider issue of how to make this particular cause a more of a mainstream challenge for education and workplace without actually focusing on a problem. It's a fantastic potential in every dyslexic person, but we are not really tapping into that well enough. And hopefully by removing the barriers, we can. Anyway, that's for me.
Thank you, Nassir. And our last expert panelist, Steve, can you please introduce yourself? Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the invite today. My name is Steve O'Brien. I am the Chief Executive of the Dyslexia Foundation. I've been around for a while. This is 25 years that we've been working in solely in the adult field. We don't work with children. We do 16 plus. Currently got about 300-400 adults on programme across the DSA. We hold contracts with the Department for Education, the Department for Works and Pensions, ESF, and various large multinational employers. And my sort of area of expertise, I sit on the International Dyslexia Association Global Board. And my biggest concern is that there are not many adult organisations across the world who work in the field of adults. In fact, I don't know another single sole organisation that works nationally on the way that dyslexia affects adults. Unfortunately, the greatest focus is education, is children. It's an easier ask to fund. But over the last 25 years, we've sort of dug out a provision where we provide free screening. We used to be able to provide free assessments, but we can't anymore. But we can find employers. And for 18 years, I made a real pain in the backside of the job centres, and now across the region of sort of Merseyside and Manchester, we have contracts set up. Ironically, we've lost one today, but we have contracts set up to provide dyslexia assessments across individuals on welfare, on PIP or unemployed provision. We set up originally to support people that are most disadvantaged from dyslexia. We deliver services across the universities in Liverpool, and we support far more DSA students now than we do unemployed individuals, purely because there's a funding stream. There's a funding stream for the DSA, there's a funding stream for access to work, but there's nothing for unemployed people. And I would say after 25 years of experience of working with unemployed people, they're the biggest social cost that we've got. It seems to be a massive area where people are left to fail. We've done a lot of work with the TUC and various other units and unions, and very much the big issue is who's going to fund a dyslexia assessment. And unfortunately, without an assessment, there's no provision, there's no access to work, there's no support. We work with apprenticeship providers. There's a funding mechanism for apprentices called ALN ASM for those people that work in that field. And it does support adults, but unfortunately, I'd say the biggest issue is the fact that there's nothing in the welfare sector. There is the dynamic purchasing system, but it's changed, and unfortunately now it's quite a wild west of provision. There's no quality assurance within the welfare to work sector under the DWP, because anybody can provide a dyslexia assessment. You don't have to be qualified, which flies in the face of the sort of quality assurance that's been put in place for the Department for Education, which is another story for another day. But on the whole, we have a free online dyslexia screening tool. We have a podcast that we launched over COVID just to support adults. And we have 3,000 people a month hit our screening tool to find out information about whether or not they're dyslexic. We do an awful lot of work with employers. And one of the things I've found over the last 5 years is that employers are more open to assessing staff. Our biggest assessment in 2020 always makes me smile is the NHS. We do more assessment work with doctors than any other profession. So it's not always the hardest to help the person that can't read. It's also the academics that do achieve. We're currently supporting over 30 police officers in the Merseyside region. 25 nurses are on programme at the moment. So it's quite a varied group of people. But ultimately, I think one of the things that we need is accountability in the sector. And that's one of the things that at the foundation that we've tried to deliver. You can come and knock on our door, get screened for dyslexia for free and get a cup of tea. You can come and knock on our door and we'll teach you to read. Lord Addington's on the call, and he's been down before to give out certificates for people that have learned to read. Lord Addington met a lady who was a nun who couldn't read and write, who came about 7 years ago. And we taught her to read through support from the Sainsbury's Family Trust. And she contacted me 2 weeks ago, and she's now at university, and she's looking for a copy of a dyslexia assessment we did 7 years ago, because she's gone from a non-reader to a university person that's going to hopefully ultimately graduate. So the simple things that you can put in place at the sort of adult level, my concern is there's not enough people working in this field. I think there's, looking around the room today, it's people who hold contracts, who work and who can provide data to say, actually, these are the issues that people are having within local authorities. These are the people that are having issues around the unions, and we have a national helpline that's been running for 25 years. We get a lot of calls around people that are getting performance managed out of jobs. We had a project about 4 years ago that was supporting people through employment tribunals, and it's very alarming that that luck is the biggest sort of factor in someone progressing and reaching their full potential, and that for me is a concern. And I think it's something that ideally, looking at who in government is accountable for adults. We've got that provision where you've got Ofsted, and I'm not going to go into that debate, but there are organisations that offer a quality assurance framework where people get support. If you're unemployed and you live in Manchester or Liverpool, you can go and access a full diagnostic assessment, 8 sessions, 1-to-1, and we'll teach you to read. It can be 6 weeks, 6 months, or 6 years. But ultimately, only if you're living in Merseyside, Manchester, because we've done that provision. So I think it shouldn't be luck is the key thing, and it needs to be the fact that there is some sort of funding available within the sort of the Department for Works and Pensions, where we have contracts that only run 6 months. So we work for 6 months with the Department for Works and Pensions, the local job centres. Then it stops until it's procured again in 6 7 or 9 months. But what happens to those people that come when the provision's not on? And it's I was talking to a foundation for ADHD, it's an ADHD group in Liverpool to support adults, and they've got a 7-year waiting list to get identified for ADHD. But the National Health Service have stepped in and said, we understand and appreciate that you can't get assessed for ADHD in the Merseyside region. It's going to take 7 years. And they fund our local ADHD organisation to offer support in the interim. And I think that's one of the sort of things that, you know, is a positive spin on the neurodiversity agenda, where actually you can put, you know, support in place to support people in the interim. But unfortunately, I think the adult debate is left behind in most places, because it's more the sort of looking at the literacy issues of children, to be a little bit controversial. I shall stop at that point. And
I was just about to sort of jump in there, Steve, so thank you. Just so that we can get on to the questions, but really, really interesting to hear all of our panelists' experience and from a wide variety of different areas. I'm going to go back to David, and I'm going to ask David our first question to comment on, please. So, David, I would really like to know, from your perspective, what you think employers can do to help their dyslexic employees.
Yeah, so following on from what we were just talking about, I think probably the biggest issue is that there isn't a conversation about it in the workplace 99% of the time. We've got 10% of the population with dyslexia, and most businesses aren't aware who actually has dyslexia within the business, or any disability for that matter, any hidden disability. I was on a trustee for the British Dyslexia Association from 2010 till 2020, and I did Michelle's role for a couple of years. And the thing that always struck me was that I would say probably 3/4 of the incoming calls and emails were around children, but actually children make up a small proportion of society. And I think that from a business point of view, the one thing that they really could do is to find out who within their organisation, or how many people within their organisation, have got dyslexia. That would be a really good starting point. One of the things that we do is we put out anonymous surveys so that we at least know who they are, because if they're not comfortable to talk about it, we still need to know how many there are in the organisation. And once you find out that you've got, I don't know, if you're employing 500 people like we do, you find out that you've got 50 odd, 60 odd, 100 dyslexics, whatever it might be, 50 dyslexics. You can then start to have regular conversations about the disability and make it normal everyday language, and make it okay, and give people the confidence and the empower them to talk about what they find difficult, rather than being frightened that they'll be managed out, or that they'll fail performance management, or they won't be promoted as a result. And I would say that goes for all disability, not just for dyslexia. It's empowering people and making people feel comfortable to talk about it. And as I said, the starting point for a business is to find out how many there are and who they are. And there's loads of ways that you can do that.
And Nassir, just following on from what David said, and we often talk about the stigma attached and associated with dyslexia. Do you think we've made strides forward in sort of getting rid of that stigma that's attached? Do you feel that there's been a change in the workplace, that employees feel more confident to come forward, or is there still that reluctance?
Well, most definitely. In some organizations, it's improved enormously. If you hear the catchphrases like D&I, which is like very popular with, you know, organizations, ESGs become very kind of a topical. They look at inclusion, they look at neurodiversity, because to them it's a great subject to talk about. But the informed and progressive employers are not looking at it like as some sort of a label. They're looking at, what can I do for my employees to be more productive, more efficient? And if dyslexia is the problem for them, it's because the way they interact with our systems, with our environment, what can we do for them? So almost every client we've got, and we've got about 40 multinational clients, the biggest brand names you can imagine, none of them actually expect those people to prove they're dyslexic. If someone says, I have a problem with dyslexia, I said, okay, what can we do for you? What can we do for you is often, what can we do in a workplace environment? So you do a workplace assessment in which we look at, identify what you struggle with, what barriers you've got, and then the solutions. That can be, in the form of either technology or coaching or both. So in those organizations, we get quite a lot of people come forward. I mean, I can name some organizations up to 20% of the workforce have received adjustment over a 4 or 5 year period. That means every year, 4% of the workforce are coming to us for that support, and that support could be a range of problems, including dyslexia. And again, we're going back to this idea of medicalizing the dyslexia. Is the whole assessment process is quite, I would say, stressful for a lot of people. They know they're struggling with something, and they don't really necessarily want to go through the whole assessment process in order to prove it. And if you actually leave the door open to them, say, well, come to me and ask for the help you need to be better in your job, you will find no one will struggle with disclosing. And that's what we've discovered in these large enterprises. And I think when it comes to practical solutions, we also find that the industry for past 30 years are great in providing solutions, but they don't normally fully understand the impact of over-subscribing solutions. Just because it makes sense to give them a range of options, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to help that individual. So again, tailoring what that individual wants to do, the kind of job they do, at that particular time, they may only need a small part of intervention. As their job changes, they might come back for more. But once you identify those easy solutions, they will happily go and use it, and they will happily go and disclose it all day long. But I have also seen it in other organizations, public sector mainly, that you have to jump through hoops, and that takes a long time, and it puts people off doing it, because once they do it, they don't actually see any positive action or any positive outcomes. Hence, they just go back to their shell and they carry on doing their stuff the way they used to, and often means lack of progress in their job. And obviously, performance management, losing their job, and all the other things that goes with it. So yeah, the right approach is to actually make it more of a mainstream. As people challenges with environment or with a condition, what can we do to overcome those challenges? That is what the approach we've taken, and it seems to really be doing really well among the lots of big employers. Thank you.
And Deborah, just going on a little bit more about to look at the importance of, or how important is it that individuals, employees in the workplace, have a dyslexia screening or have a dyslexia diagnosis?
I'm really glad you asked me that, because I was thinking about this a lot once I read that briefing paper. I'm actually going to say something contradictory, I think, to David. I actually think, and don't get me wrong, I think screening is potentially a really empowering tool, and it's the beginning of, that journey. I think, though, it's potentially a kind of red herring in the employment sector, as in for adults in work, not who are unemployed, but because I think it places the emphasis back on that individual to go down that screening assessment route. So you have a screening, which, yes, it has many benefits. I'm not underselling that at all. But essentially, what happens with that? You give that to employer. Do they know what to do with it? No. You wait 3 years for, let's say, an ADHD assessment on the NHS, or you have £800 to spend on a, whatever, on a dyslexic assessment. Possibly you don't. And I think I think that screening in, essentially the law is quite clear in that it's the employer's duty to be inclusive. It's not the employer's duties to start screening people. It's a nice add-on, but I don't think that's the kind of the thing that, the kicker, if you like, that's my thinking. I'm obviously happy to be persuaded otherwise, but I think that essentially it places that emphasis back on that individual, and it doesn't necessarily, I don't think, maybe advance, or put the ball in the employer's court potentially.
David, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting for a moment that we should be screening people. I think there's a huge number of things that we can put into place, whether or not they've got a diagnosis or not in the workplace. What I was saying is that where people already know that they're dyslexic, I think we need to empower them to have the confidence to come forward to say, I am dyslexic, and not feel like that will impact on their careers. And I think not just dyslexia, all disability. I think it's awful that we live in a society where people don't feel that they can talk about what they find easy and also what they find difficult. So I wasn't really talking about screening per se, and actually I agree with you entirely on that. What I do think we could be doing is sharing and supporting with some of the really easy things that Nassir was talking about a moment ago. So technology provides huge help. Just things like if you're working in a business that's got specific language, that business uploading those specific words and spelling to the autocorrect on Office 365 doesn't cost anything, but makes a huge difference to people on a day-to-day basis. Organising telephone lists so that people can actually look people up without having to know how to spell their names. That makes a massive difference. I remember when I worked in business, I used to have a load of Post-it notes all the way around my monitor with the spellings for the people I worked with so that I could physically look them up on the phone. They're just simple things that don't cost anything. But I think the starting point is to get to a point where people are happy to say, actually, I need help, or I'm struggling with this, or hey, I'm dyslexic and I think slightly differently to you, and actually this is a benefit to you as an organisation. But that's sort of what I was saying, as opposed to
Nassir,
yeah,
I
absolutely.
think if you want to come in quickly, but I do want to
yeah,
bring
absolutely. I think disclosure in companies who get it, really get it, is a positive thing. People want to say, I'm dyslexic. Hey, that's a great thing. It's not like I'm dyslexic, please feel sorry for me or help me. So I think I go back to what David just said. What problem are you trying to fix is the issue. And we know in America, they're terrified of medicalizing these things because it's got lots of litigations and all that behind of it. So they want us not to worry about labels or conditions. Tell us what their barrier the person is facing. It could be dyslexia, about why they can't read or write. It could be, I don't know, any other condition. Just tell us they can't do that. Can you help them to do it? That's where you can actually get people to be more positive about dyslexia, saying, I couldn't do this one, but I can now. Now I can do things you can't do. So I'm getting like my superpowers back.
Steve, I'd like to sort of just move the conversation on a little bit to think about and talk a little bit more about inclusivity. And I notice in the chat, someone's actually posted being neurodiverse can be a lonely place. And I don't disagree with that at all. Steve, what I'd like to know from you is what you think, the steps that organisations could be taking to make the workplace more inclusive for dyslexics.
I think it ties the two questions together. Basically, an organisation has to have a disability policy. So we wouldn't sit there and go, what does a disabled person, for instance, a wheelchair user, need to enter an organisation to work at a company? What does a hearing impaired person need? It's obvious what they need. What does somebody know? Do they need Braille? Do they need what is the assistive technology that they need, or what is the support they need? The simple question should be, what is an organisation's dyslexia policy as a part of their disability policy? It shouldn't be. It's at the moment it's too fluffy and friendly and all those sort of things that people say. It should just be quite honestly and open to say, okay, as an organisation, what do you do for dyslexia? If you don't, then as Nassir said, litigation will follow. I've been involved in lots of legal cases where people are getting sued because they're not getting the support or the provision within the workplace. So as an organisation, we work with many organisations that do have fantastic policies that support their employees, but there's many organisations that don't. You know, you ask, what is the disability policy? And they haven't got one, let alone a dyslexia policy. And I think my biggest, the guys that on here from the DAN network know this is one of my biggest bones of contention, is the dyslexia identity has been diluted over the years. We've got a situation now where people use the term neurodiversity, which was coined for the term for autism originally. And we've got this dilution of, I asked 20 students last year as a part of our feedback to how we develop our business plan, what or how do they identify as a person with dyslexia? And the 25, only one person knew what neurodiversity was. So they didn't have a clue what neurodiversity was, but everyone starts to talk about neurodiversity. If the individual user doesn't know what neurodiversity is, and they don't know what dyslexia is, how's an employee going to understand what neurodiversity is? We need to talk simply in a basic term to many people because they don't understand the needs of a dyslexic employee. But simple things, as Nassir said, about £700, £800 worth of investment to address what technology or what support can be put in place. It doesn't have to be technology. It can be an individual who's a learning mentor, who is a role model within an organisation to say, I'm dyslexic, it's not a problem. I was in a meeting last week to do with a museum, I won't say who, but there was a person that's coming at quite a high level who was criticised by a trustee of the organisation to say, your spelling's not up to scratch. You're sending emails out that, you're making spelling mistakes. And there was 3 or 4 people who were like, yeah, I'm not happy with the fact that you're making spelling mistakes. Now, fortunately, the chief exec of this, I won't say where, this place, went, well, we'll stop that conversation there because I'm dyslexic. And it's not what spelling mistakes he's making, it's what he's writing. And the fact that the person is such a valued member of the team, why are we talking about spelling errors when actually the guy's bringing in, hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of investment into the city? And people sat back and went, oh, okay. But for the first thing that someone could criticise was not that the guy's doing a fantastic job, but, oh, he's making a spelling mistake. He left his last job because of that same conversation. So I think having a policy to say, do you know what, we're empathetic, we understand, we've got the resources, we've got the technology, we've got the partners in place to offer an assessment, a screening, whatever it may be, is very important. Thank
you, Steve. Lord Addington, I can see that you've got your hand up. Are you able to unmute yourself? And I believe you might have a question.
Hi there. The question I was asking is probably more addressed to Dave and Steve. I think that anybody else something to say? As me and Nassir work together, I'd be surprised if I'm going to come back to him. What is that initial phase you think that people have to go through that they realize this is important? What is that trigger point? Because, we're all sitting down here, and I think Steve's talked about going to other organizations. David, you've worked through there. What is that trigger point when people suddenly go, oh, this is valuable? Is it caused by the threat of litigation? Or is it caused by something else? Like, for instance, a child, to go back to children again, realizing of somebody in management. Is there a pattern to this, or is it very random?
I mean, I can only speak from my experience, obviously. I think it's the latter. I think people are less worried about litigation, and actually it's where they realise that dyslexic adults, dyslexic children, sometimes think differently. They have ideas that move the organisation forwards. They challenge in it in a slightly different way quite often. And from the employee's point of view, I think they tend to get the confidence to talk about their own struggles and their own worries and things that they find easy and things they find difficult when they see other people doing that normally above them in the organisation. So certainly as I've become higher up, more and more people in the organisations I work in, I'll stand up and say I'm dyslexic, and lots of people will come forward and say, actually, so am I, and I've never said that before. That's my experience.
I did a training session last week for 180 accountants from a large multinational accountancy firm. And they asked me to do the training because they want to retain staff. It was a positive, listen, we struggle to recruit staff at the moment, which lots of organisations are struggling to retain staff. And if you're spending money on training accountants, police officers, whatever it may be, especially the National Health Service stuff that we do, it's a really positive aspect to say, listen, we have no problem with you being dyslexic. We're going to support you. We're going to put things in place. And I think there's always the threat of litigation. There's been lots of litigation that's gone on. But ultimately, I think it's employers now are recognising that they've got staff that have got vast quantities of skills that they need to retain. And if you're going to put simple steps in place to support that person to flourish in the workplace, and there are lots more people now who are in position to go, actually, I'm dyslexic, so let's do a day, or let's do some training, or let's do something where we support people who have got dyslexia and we identify it as an issue that we can address, rather than people leave. Or we do get a lot of people who do get performance managed out of positions purely because of the dyslexia and also other characteristics. But ultimately, I think a lot of employers now today are looking at the fact that they've put an investment into recruiting somebody, they've put an investment into training somebody, so let's address that and move that person forward the best way.
So you're both saying effectively that you think it's moved beyond that threat of litigation, and that sort of moved on, that there's enough knowledge here, if people are open to it, to actually say there is a model of good practice which saves you money and makes your organization slightly better. And that is that's a much easier message to sell. So I'm just wondering if both of you had coming in with that.
I think it is that case, but then you look at the small to medium enterprises, those sort of organizations, So it's an organisation. I mean, I've had, in the last 6 months, I had a guy that owned 4 pubs who went above and beyond to train somebody within the pub who couldn't read and write, who was dyslexic. But ultimately, they're a rarity. So the small to medium enterprises, those SME organisations, will struggle more with putting the investments in place. But obviously, with a little bit of knowledge and using access to work, you know, they can find a resource to fund the support that's needed. So I think, in a positive aspect, in my own experience, the large employers are becoming a lot better, and the medium-sized enterprises are catching up. But ultimately, there does need to be a drive. Access to work, you know, to be controversial, is getting less effective. But ultimately, there is a mechanism there to support somebody with dyslexia. It's just having the knowledge. And I think that's where it goes back to backing it up with the fact that it's not litigation, it's the fact that someone should be making employers accountable via sort of equality and diversity to say, yes, let's identify these people, let's support them.
Okay, Thank you, Steve. Nassir, have you got something that you would like to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I mentioned public sector, and Steve mentioned about NHS. I'll give you an example how a situation like this is actually costing NHS so much. I was just last week, I was talking to a dyslexic junior doctor who had been given administrative and clerical work because he was not very good in taking notes in a kind of a ward round. They thought that they could demote him to doing an administrative role, which he was terrible at. When I spoke to him, he said, I'm brilliant I want to be a surgeon, and I'm very good in A&E, but I can't get there because my dyslexia is holding me back. And then, in a way, that is not just isolated to him. I was told by a senior consultant in Southampton, she was looking for ENT consultants. She couldn't because 2 or 3 of her best registrars are dyslexic and keep failing the exams to the next level. So I'm thinking employees don't really get the idea of that. Use people for their strength rather than beat them on the head for their weakness. So if these guys knew this person's got the talent in a particular area, they should be supporting him, removing the communication barrier. That's all it is. Dyslexia to me in a workplace is lack of being able to communicate effectively in the form that people expect you to. If you can get rid of that, then they can actually perform the job they're good at, and they'll be better than anybody else. We're short of consultants, we're short of doctors, yet we can't afford to lose talent like that and for him to drop out of NHS after 5 years of graduating.
Thank you. Thank you, Nassir. Now I'm going to take a couple of questions. We only have roughly 10 minutes left. If I can ask the people who I go to for questions just to keep your questions as short as possible so that we can return to the panel for their responses. Dr. Melanie Thorley, would you please unmute yourself and you can ask your question?
Hi folks, it's lovely to actually see so many familiar faces and names. Dominic said, when was the trigger? For me, I'm a disability outreach officer for a university, and I would say the trigger points for people being ashamed and stigmatized is as soon as they start school and it's picked up on. We have to unpick lots and lots of detrimental stuff that has been foisted on our dyslexic students. I'm not a neurodiverse person, but as I put in the chat, myself and Becky and some other people here are involved in a charity for neurodivergent adults. So I do know quite a lot about it, even though I'm not actually in that group myself. One tiny thing that can make a difference about employers and employees is if organisations change their terminology. Why do dyslexic people have to declare or disclose that they are dyslexic? They are not trying to smuggle drugs through customs. There is no stigma, there's no naughtiness attached to it. That tiny change from those words to something like share gives that person more autonomy and makes them feel more welcome. And I myself, Diversity and Ability and my professional body harangued UCAS for 5 years. And UCAS have now changed all the stuff around disability and mental health to share. And that tiny little difference can make people feel nurtured and welcomed and supported.
Thank you, Melanie. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm going to go to Deborah just to ask Deborah a question to bring her back into the conversation. And I think this is quite an important one, because obviously on this inquiry call, we've got lots of professionals and we've got lots of people that work in the field of dyslexia. But I don't want to exclude those dyslexic individuals who may watch back this inquiry or read some of the information on the things that we discussed. And Deborah, I'd really like to ask you, if someone who is dyslexic and is listening to this inquiry and what is being said, but has yet to disclose to their employer that they are struggling or are indeed dyslexic and disclose that information, what advice would you give them on how to approach this with their employer?
Thanks for asking me that. I think I don't think there's one kind of answer really. And it's very much individual based on, you know, that individual's experiences of, you know, school and previous experiences of disclosure. I think if I was to speak to them, I would say that, you know, I guess emphasize, you know, what potentially, you know, the benefits of disclosure or of sharing, you know, effectively, you know, what you could get out of that process. So you could have support, you could have a coach, you know, all of these things. And to kind of, you know, in that way, make them feel that it's not just, you don't just sort of tell someone and then nothing happens. You know, there is a kind of consequence to it, which is obviously hopefully a positive one. Again, it's just such a difficult question because it's just so individual. You know, I mean, I would say to them, I think, you know, generally, you know, it's not you. There's nothing wrong with you. You know, it's, you know, the educational system, you know, et cetera, or the environment, and you're great, essentially. Whether that, you know, that is actually quite simplistic, whether that lands or, you know, whatever. But yeah, I think I think a lot of what people have said already in terms of changing the narrative around, instead of dyslexia, it's sharing. I think organisations have a duty to support all employees with, let's say, for example, a workplace wellness plan. So you're encouraging them to talk about their strengths, their challenges more broadly. And therefore, that is a kind of potential mechanism to talk about dyslexia and disclose dyslexia without kind of it being a thing like oh, I'm dyslexic, I need to have a special kind of, you know, it needs to be an event, like a sharing event. You know, it's much more of a cultural shift potentially. So yeah, they're my thoughts.
Thank you, Deborah. And I can just see in the chat, someone was asking why it finishes at 3 o'clock. It's this segment of the inquiry session that finishes at 3 o'clock, and then we have different focus for the session between 3 to 4, which you are welcome to stay on to. It's just I have to finish up my section at 3. The next person who raised their hand was Lloyd Shankly. Apologies, my eyesight is terrible, but I think I can read that on. You
pronounced that perfectly.
Thank you. If you've got a question, can you try and keep it quite succinct? Or if you want to make a comment, same thing. Thank you.
Of course. Mine was about what toolkits and guidelines there are on a national level that are available to organisations to make sure that we are embedding inclusivity into our day-to-day working practice, but also our approach to performance improvement plans. So, for example, performance improvement plans are often the challenges that people face that lead to those plans can often be correlated with difficulties that are linked to dyslexia. And I think there needs to be a national review of how our attitude is towards that. And I just wondered if you could signpost us as employers and managers as to what we can use as a guideline, as a template, because I think that just saying, let's make our workplace inclusive is great. I'm dyslexic, I'm all for that, but it's not tangible. And actually having some sort of tangible guidelines would be immeasurably helpful. Thank you.
Nassir, do you want to come in on that?
If you want to be inclusive, you've got to be inclusive to all disabilities, because you can't just focus on the neurodiversity. If they don't get the culture of inclusion, they won't be able to do the dyslexia well either. So there are good organizations out there. Of course, BDA would be great for dyslexia, but Business Disability Forum has got a range of policies and documents that you can actually share with all the employers. It's got the language, it's got the actual policies, it's got all the other practices that you want to do. But ultimately, you really have to look at the business angle of why you want to be inclusive. It's not about being kind. It's actually getting more out of your workforce. And by that, we keep talking about barriers. The barriers are universal across the ages. Whether it's reading, whether it's writing, whether it's actually presenting, whether it's hearing, all that could be easily fixed if the companies look at the strength of the workforce, and by that bring in tools to do it. Certainly in terms of simple policy, make everything universally accessible, right? Both in terms of digital and practice. It's much easier principle. It doesn't cost a lot of money, but it needs different way of thinking. And that's what we need to do to the employers, to see the benefit of employing disabled people, not for the legal reason, not because of kindness, because they've got so much to give and they're not giving.
David, is there anything you would like to add?
Yeah, just very quickly, and I totally agree with everything that Nassir just said. Specifically to dyslexia, I believe on the Dyslexia Association website there is an advice section which has got things you can do on a day-to-day basis for staff within your organisation, and there's a great big long list of different things that most of them are cost neutral or actually don't cost anything at all.
Thank you, Deborah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I was just going to reference the CIPD and Neurodiversity Toolkit is a good resource to go to. I don't think that there is kind of one framework currently. Like, I suppose the closest might be the Disability Confidence Scheme, because it's by the government and it's had consultation with disability, the disability sector. But obviously there's pluses and minuses with that in itself. So I kind of think at the moment it's kind of have a look at what's out there. There are a lot of toolkits and they're pretty much really good quality. So just have a look, and it might be that, for example, for your organisation, you need to develop your own framework, because your organisation will be different to mine, to etc. the next person. So that might be the way to go, is that you actually develop your own framework based on what you see is already out there.
And lastly, Steve, if you get anything to add, if someone came to you for where to go for advice and support, where would you direct them?
I think you've got to look at it at a different sort of, I mean, I'm dyslexic, so I always look at things at sort of like a holistic picture. So I would look at it, putting it on the individual. We spend, or the government spends, £40 million a year doing needs assessments for university students. That £40 million is a lot of money through the DSA. So for me, I would look at the fact that when someone does a dyslexia assessment, within the assessment, it should clearly state what reasonable adjustments should be made for the individual, what technology they can use. All the people that do the level 7, the level 5 qualifications know what to put in place for a dyslexic person. If you're a practitioner, you know. Put it into the dyslexia assessment, whether they're at secondary school, further education, higher education. And then when they go to an employer and they've got a report that says, I'm dyslexic, I might be dyspraxic, I could have also have dyscalculia. These are the things that I need. And then make that person proactive and get them to engage with the employer. The employer should have this toolkit in place. I've not yet come across a universal toolkit or an employer that has that. And there's a big issue between who takes responsibility for dyslexic people. Is it human resource, occupational health? So put the onus back into the assessment reports. Stop spending £40 million a year of the DSA's money on these needs assessments. The £720 for a needs assessment. It's far more expensive to get a needs assessment than it is to get a professional dyslexia assessment. The professional dyslexia assessment is far more value than someone telling you that you need the same equipment year in, year out, virtually. I mean, I've been doing this 25 years and the same usual suspects are put on a piece of paper. Stick that in the assessment, and then the individual can go, be proactive, and they can be the person that says, listen, I'm dyslexic, I need a little bit of help. But if you give me that little bit of help, I can progress, I can move forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. I just want to finish by saying thank you so much to all the panelists. It's been such an insightful and important discussion. And Steve said at the start, we often focus on education, and we know that that's where the problems start for individuals with dyslexia when they've not got the diagnosis and the right support. But we can often forget about adults in the workplace as well, and not perhaps place as much emphasis and importance on that area as well. So thank you so much to the panelists for sharing their expertise. The chat was really, really active, and I tried to read through it at the same time and multitask a little bit. I know that there's individuals that wanted to ask questions, but unfortunately we have ran out of time for this section. But I do hope that we will have the opportunity to discuss this again in more detail, because there's clearly a lot that still needs to be looked at, and we need to take on board everybody's advice to help improve things for adults in the workplace. I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Georgia Niolaki. Georgia, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. Hello, everyone. It was so insightful, the discussion at the first part of the session today. And to be honest, because I am a specialist dyslexia assessor and tutor, but also did at Breakspear University. I'm a senior lecturer in SpLD and inclusion, and I prepare the generation of the new teachers, the new specialist dyslexia teachers and assessors. But also I'm a trustee with the British Dyslexia Association, because teaching for me, it's not enough. I felt that I need to be on the field and working with the individuals and supporting and advocating and raising awareness for dyslexia. I totally agree with all the points raised earlier about the workplace and dyslexia, but I would like also to emphasize something really, really important. It is the network, the human network of support. It is important for individuals who have dyslexia. I'm dyslexic myself. I'm also bilingual. I have never been diagnosed with dyslexia. I realized that I have dyslexia through my learning and teaching, because I was before in a primary school teacher, working in Greece and in the UK. And I know how it is to have dyslexia in 2 languages, not only in one, and struggling with languages since you are a young child. So I truly think that it's also the human force behind supporting the individuals who have dyslexia. And it is important in the family, but also in the workplace. But that's enough about myself, because I won't be talking about me today. We will be talking about dyslexia and the justice system in the second part of our fantastic discussion and session of raising awareness about the needs and what solutions, and focusing more on solutions rather than on the ideology and the theory behind dyslexia and the philosophy. So I would like to welcome, exactly in the same way that Michelle did earlier, our panelists for this second part of our session on dyslexia and the criminal justice system. I would like to introduce David Breakspear. Yes, hello, David. So David is a criminal justice champion and also a former prisoner. So he will provide to us his real life experience of the difficulties that individuals who have dyslexia and who are in the criminal justice system face. I would like also to introduce Karen Ryan, who is the director of prison delivery and also the director of Sun Trust. So hello, Karen. I'm not sure if we can see Karen as well.
Hi everyone, nice to be here this afternoon.
Fantastic. And finally, I would like to introduce Melanie Jameson, who is the founder of Dyslexia Consultancy Malvern. All these individuals, they have very unique experience and background and understanding of the needs in the criminal justice system, and individuals who are struggling also with dyslexic difficulties. And I would like to hand over to them to introduce themselves briefly, and then we are going to, I'm going to remind you the issue, the topic that we will be discussing today. I don't want to be talking about problems, because it's not a problem. We are creating the problems, but we are also here to provide solutions and give ideas and make sure that in the future things are put in place appropriate for everyone, for every person across any ages who have dyslexic difficulties. So if you would like, David, to talk about yourself and introduce yourself and talk to us about the needs of individuals who are in the criminal justice system, and what support needs to be put in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Georgia. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's David Breakspear. As Georgia mentioned, I am a former prisoner. I was trapped in revolving doors of crisis and crime for almost 4 decades. And in my time as a prisoner, I was employed as a Shannon Trust mentor for a number of years, and I was also employed as an education mentor and as a teacher's assistant in prison, believe it or not. I'm not dyslexic, however, I am neurodivergent. And for me, one of the biggest issues within the criminal justice system, or for myself personally within the prison system, is the lack of awareness and understanding from prison staff when it comes to people with neurodivergent conditions. You'll find that within prison itself, neurodiverse people are more likely to suffer from control and restraints procedures than the general population neurotypical prisoners. And this is something that really has to change. And it is that lack of understanding and awareness amongst the prison staff that really does and can make the difference. We don't expect people working in prisons to be able to diagnose neurodiverse conditions or to be fully conversant in the, if you like, tools and applications that could be provided to someone neurodiverse conditions. But what we do want is for people working in prisons to at least be aware that the person in front of you may be suffering from anxiety due to their neurodiverse conditions, and that their reactions are based on that individual behaviour and it's not based on their attitude, if you like. And that is what does lead to misunderstandings. It leads to violent disruptions on the wings, and it means that people with neurodiverse conditions are not receiving the support and treatment, for want of a better phrase, but they're not receiving the support in prison they should be. I'm pleased to say that for the last 12 months, 13 months actually, I've been a part of Revolving Doors Agency's Neurodiversity Forum. We've been working with the Ministry of Justice now for the last 13 months on neurodiversity in the criminal justice system. We are only in the 6-month exploratory stage at the moment. We've had 4 meetings, and we've broken the system down into arrest, so police and policing, the courts and sentencing, prison and probation, and resettlement. So it really is an issue that's starting to be taken very seriously by the Ministry of Justice. And it's also something that the work that we're doing with Revolving Doors and the Diversity Forum is something that we're also going to be taking forward as well with the Ministry. So although historically neurodiversity in the criminal justice system has been lagging behind in a big way, I think the work that's been going on recently within the criminal justice system is seeing that tide being turned for one. So thank you very much.
Thank you, David. If we can hear from Karen, her background, please.
Hello, hi everyone. It's so nice to be here and so nice to see you as well, David, and to hear from one of our former mentors. As I talk a little bit more, you'll see that our mentors helping people and supporting people with lots of different issues is really key to what we do at Shannon Trust. So we're a charity working in prisons to train and support mentors who help support those who can't read or struggle with reading using our Turning Pages resources. So whilst it's not a dyslexia-specific service, and I am by no means, I'm going to hand my hands up, an expert in dyslexia, we do know that our model helps those that are. And many of our learners and mentors have told us that they have dyslexia, whether diagnosed or not. And we know that our programs can really help by being, it's a synthetic phonics program. We know that really helps people. The type of resources that we use are developed with paper and fonts that help make it easier for neurodivergent learners. And we have varied and repeated exercises. The sessions that our learners have with the mentors are short and regular sessions, only 20 to 30 minutes usually, and they're working one-to-one at their own pace with their mentor. So it's that learner choice for us is key to encompass everybody that might need our support. We also use things like coloured overlays to help minimise visual stress, and we match reading books to the right level for the learners and to encourage that reading for pleasure and not just for study, so kind of helping to produce that reading for pleasure and feeling. So we try to take the learning outside of mixed ability classrooms, and we think this is key to helping reach many more learners. We try to create an environment where learners feel comfortable with somebody they can relate to, which is where our peer mentors are key. It feels like somebody that they know perhaps on the wing or in the workplace, but it really helps overcome negative classroom experiences that people may have had in the past. And this is what our learners often tell us has been a barrier for them previously and why they fell out of education at a young age, and they see it as not perhaps being for them. So this is why we feel it's key to have a range of different options for people to be able to engage with. So we know this approach works, and this is why we're starting to use the same approach for maths as well. But we've always known that a disproportionately high percentage of people in prison, so we know at least 50% struggle with reading, and this has not gotten any better over recent years. Obviously, the challenges of lockdown have made things really difficult for people in terms of education and developing their learning. I can't imagine what it felt like for somebody who struggles with reading for whatever reason, to have paperwork thrust through the door and not be able to read it or understand it. And we're still now, to this day, now lockdown restrictions are lessening, we're still seeing regime restrictions, which makes it difficult for our mentors to have regular sessions with their learners, because these sessions usually take place in their own time, in that association time within the prison environment. So it's those dedicated mentors that continue to make our programme work, but what we really need to see is the prison regime needing to help them to be able to do their role, and giving it that sense of importance and knowing that it's a skilled role that they're doing. So we work in partnership with prisons. So I'm talking mainly about our prison work, but we do have some services as well in the community where we're helping to engage people in the wider criminal justice network. It's something we work in partnership with prisons, and this can work well when we've got a member of staff giving dedicated time and authority to help make that happen. But often it's seen as something that's nice to have, it's a free resource, but we could really do with that dedicated staff and provision to make sure that it can really happen and overcome those individual barriers in each prison. We really complement formal education. I don't think it's at all about one or the other. I think we need an informal as well as a formal approach to learning, and there's definitely a place for both. We can see that we can build up confidence for our learners through that one-to-one work at their own pace, them choosing to take part in it, and really build up their confidence and help them feel ready to engage in classroom provision and perhaps qualifications. And certainly we've seen that. We've seen a number of our learners go on and achieve those qualifications and engage in that classroom provision because they now feel that they're more confident to do so. However, the biggest impact is often the difference improving reading skills, particularly makes improving people's lives. So that ability to cope better with prison life, to be able to communicate in its wider sense, and the way they actually view themselves. And this is what we often hear, is people change their perception of themselves and their own ability. And this can then help support those more positive behaviours in the future. We've seen recently there's been a move towards focusing a bit more of a light on that reading education in prisons and recognising that it's not at the moment fitting the needs of all. This year's joint Ofsted and HMIP report into reading education in prisons really did show that and kind of gave some recommendations to take forward. And so the Ofsted have updated their handbook for inspections as well, and they focused a little bit more on the reading side of things too. So there's lots of positive recommendations out there. However, the focus on measuring and testing is not always the answer. Obviously, we need to know the level of need and making sure that we're engaging everybody that needs that support. But testing can be off-putting for some learners, and rather maybe a focus perhaps on demonstrating progression, demonstrating how people are improving their skills might be a bit more positive. As I said, there's some positive moves in the prison world encompassing the needs of neurodivergent learners. So there have been recently employment of neurodiversity support managers who take a bit more of a whole prison approach to identifying, understanding and the training in the needs of neurodivergent learners. So that awareness feels like it's getting out there a little bit more. It's also the use of technology as well, which I think is a positive thing. Even in the prison world, we're starting to see a bit more of the use of technology in-cell digital devices and scanning pens. We also at Shannon Trust have a video version of our Turning Pages learning resources, and we're just starting to pilot an app version in the community with Kent, Surrey and Sussex Probation Service. So all of the apps and the digital devices as well. For us, we've had neurodiversity specialists look at as well to make sure we're encompassing the needs of all of our learners in terms of the font, colour and imagery that we use to make sure it's accessible. So I just guess in summary for me, I guess it's kind of encompassing lots of different learning opportunities for people is key. Taking outside of some of the formal approaches to make sure that people feel comfortable with taking that step, because there still is a large amount of stigma around people struggling with reading for whatever reason that is.
Fantastic, Karen. Thank you so much for this lovely introduction. I would like now to give the speech to Melanie.
Right, good afternoon, everybody. I have over 30 years experience as an adult dyslexia specialist. Actually, I first went into prisons before I retrained in dyslexia as a tutor. And I'd just like to sing the praises of the Shannon Trust. I was a Shannon Trust mentor tutor for quite a few years in a high security prison. And what is so lovely about that is the effect not only on the learner, but the confidence and what it gives to the person doing the mentoring. And I remember meeting the founder of the Shannon Trust many years ago. He's no longer with us. And he had this insight when he was told that 50% of people in prisons couldn't read. He said, aha, 50% can read, so let's pair them up. And off it went. So I suppose I've moved within different parts of the criminal justice system. Quite early on, I did briefings on offending in the House of Lords through Lord Addington. I'm glad to see that he's here today. I've been advisor to various dyslexia charities and done committee work with government departments. I think the most recent one was the Ministry of Justice Practice Development Group for what they call LDD. Now, this LDD term that prisons use is an absolute pain. What they've basically done is put learning disabilities, people with social impairments who would have an intellectual impairment, and kind of bung them in with people with what we used to call specific learning difficulties. So the prison system is still using that term. The MOJ, the Ministry of Justice, has moved on to neurodivergence and neurodiversity, which they use fairly interchangeably. We have to look out for a kind of all-encompassing emphasis on autism, but actually the consultation and the neurodiversity action plan, which David referred to, includes a huge number of people, including those with acquired brain injury. So dyslexia is in there with that much bigger population. I suppose I really got going in the justice system when I was commissioned to provide guidelines on all the different specific learning differences by the judiciary. And so I managed to get them all listed in the equal treatment bench book, which magistrates and judges use. And for a number of years, every time it was updated, I could update. But as so often happens with me, probably because I've been around too long, I lose my contact and it's very difficult getting another one. And I've done, I think, more work with courts and probation than the other areas of the justice system, but my main interest has always been prisons. Every month I go into a high security prison. And the thing that I've noticed is post-COVID, things are still not back to normal. Education and workshops are continually being cancelled by lack of staff. And because of an unfortunate decision that was made by a previous Secretary of State, the number of officers was slashed. And probation was more or less dismantled, and neither service has ever recovered. So I notice at Long Lartin prison, officers who look 17 or 18, and the more experienced officers are going, and the younger ones are trying to cope the best they can. So what I try and do is work with government. I've fed into the Coates Review and the House of Commons Education Committee report, which is very recent, and this neurodiversity action plan. And I suppose any worthwhile solution has to consider 4 areas. One is screening and follow-up. Another is training for staff, and I've always maintained there has to be awareness training for everybody and support level training for those who are actually working with individuals. There has to be properly funded support from the MOJ, the Ministry of Justice, that is the policy arm, Her Majesty's Prison and Probation Service, HMPPS, that is the operational arm, and buy-in from governors and the senior management team. And the fourth thing is through the gate arrangements. No good getting somebody well set up on the inside and then on the outside and it doesn't link up. And I'm really keen that anything that we come up with as a good idea is actually embedded in what is already going on. So that's three things really. The forthcoming prison education contracts that are all coming up for renewal next year. This neurodiversity action plan, which has been produced, the government has responded, and for every recommendation they agree, they partly agree or they disagree. And so that runs till November, so we're now into November. Working through the four main providers in prisons, Western College, Milton Keynes, Novus, which is Manchester, and People Plus, and finally, most interestingly, Ofsted. The head of Ofsted in offender settings has actually said that she's going to focus relentlessly on reading, an enhanced focus on reading, she said. She's going to look for proper identification of reading needs. And so she's going to really look out for this. And one thing I always say with reading is check for visual stress. So I think I'll stop there and we'll see what questions arise. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melanie. So just to put into context our discussion today, in 2013, quite a few years ago, Chris Grayling stated that the percentage of young offenders who were dyslexic are approximately 57%, and this is approximately equal to 10% of the population as a whole. So although for many years now, policymakers, they are aware about the scale of the problem within the criminal justice system, yet little policy have been produced to turn the tide. Due to the scale of the problem and the limited amount of support provided to those in the criminal justice system, low educational attainment has contributed to their entry within the system. But also it's not only the difficulties that the individuals who are in the criminal justice they face, it is also the fact that individuals who are supporting the young offenders or the offenders, they do not have the awareness to support individuals who have these difficulties. So this situation where we need to be aware not only of the needs of the individuals who have these literacy difficulties and they are not recognized, but also knowing how the people who are working in the justice system can support effectively individuals who have dyslexia and they are in the criminal justice system. So my first question is about the programs that the panelists mentioned earlier. How can this improve the literacy rates within the criminal justice system? I would like to ask Melanie to answer our first question. So what are the opportunities to scale some of the programs to improve literacy rates within the criminal justice system? What are your thoughts? Thank you, Melanie.
I think it has to come within the context of this MOJ neurodiversity, this huge piece of work, which is covering, I think, as David mentioned, police, courts, prison and probation. HMPPS, the operational arm, had produced a rapid screener, and again using the term LDD, rapid screener, followed by those who tested positive by a more detailed screener. And I thought actually these tools were pretty good. They'd been trialed quite extensively. And I'll just put the caveat that one thing I've been banging my head against the brick wall regarding since about 1995, I suppose, is that we must screen everybody who comes into prisons, not just those who are going on to education. And this is because, as we all know, so many people are just going to duck education because of their experience in schools. So we need an effective screening and follow-up, and we need to make sure that it's clear that people aren't just using the term assessment loosely, which they so often do. It's just like any illness, you screen and then you assess more closely. And I think actually this, I don't know if you probably can't see it, the detailed and the rapid and detailed screeners are quite good, but the neurodiversity, the people who are considering the neurodiversity action plan are not happy with it and they're working on something else. So we need to get that right, and we need to get the support in place. And really, however good a scheme you might try and get in, these sort of building blocks need to be there. And I suppose people are aware, I mean, obviously Shannon Trust and David is aware that there is a security issue, that you need security clearance. You can't just kind of waft into a prison. And that takes quite a long time to gain. And because Professor Amanda Kirby isn't there, I must mention her Do-It profiler, which she's used in many prisons. The MOJ felt that it might go against the data confidentiality, so they haven't actually endorsed it, but still she's used it successfully in many prisons. And the other dyslexia savvy organisation is Genius Within. So, and again, as I mentioned before, I would definitely, with the screening, have a visual stress screening tool. I don't know whether Shannon Trust have still got one. I did one for Shannon Trust many years ago, but I'll leave it there and let somebody else say something.
Karen, would you like to comment on this?
Yes, just to answer the question about the visual stress, yeah, we have coloured overlays that we encourage the use of to help with visual stress, and we do train our mentors in science of visual stress and how to support people with that. But just in terms of kind of scaling programs to kind of help with that general literacy rates within the prison, I do think that the use of screeners to accurately identify, and this is one of the recommendations that came from the report, the Joint Ofsted and HMIP report into reading education, is that the current initial assessments perhaps aren't really kind of picking up people. And we know that there's a whole issue around those initial assessments in prison as to the times of when they get done. They're often done with people when they've arrived in the prison within the first few days. You can imagine yourselves, if you just arrived in prison, being out in the right frame of mind to sit and do an educational assessment, perhaps not the best time for you. And so we know that they don't kind of pull out accurate results from that. So kind of having those assessments perhaps later on in a person's journey in prison, when they're a little bit more settled, would help. But also kind of introducing that screener in a way that's felt as an informal an approach, is not feeling like a test. Because people will find ways to get by in those assessments, and ways to get through to feel that they can hide almost and duck away from the education provision. So I think there needs to be a joined up approach, but also a variety of ways of kind of making that more inclusive for people, and also incentives as well, perhaps around that taking part in education programs. We know that often people get paid more for being in jobs than in education, so that's another incentive not to get involved with education. So that's an area I feel that does need to be looked at. But maybe widening those programs such as Shannon Trust. Obviously, I'm going to say Shannon Trust because I'm from Shannon Trust, but there are other kind of informal learning methods, just finding that individual approach for people outside of education settings as well, until people are confident to take part in those mixed ability classroom settings. It takes quite a lot of confidence building to get people there for a whole variety of reasons. But if we can really kind of strengthen that offer of the peer learning support, having it take place in workshops, on the wings, in other areas, I think that's going to help build its confidence to take part in those programs going forward.
Fantastic. Thank you, Karen. It is similar to what Melanie mentioned earlier about 50% of the people not being able to read, but we can pair them up with the other half and then have a success story there. David, what are your thoughts about screening? Do you think that this can reduce negative behaviors? Do you think that this can improve the situation? What are your thoughts?
It can, but it depends on who does it. Like Helen was saying there about the assessments. Most people, when going through prison, will begin with what's known as a universal assessment. And most of those classes are run by a tutor from the provider, but you'll find that there's 2 or 3 prisoners as mentors helping out. Now, it's quite easy for someone working in that environment to then help somebody through, because no one wants to see someone stuck behind in their cell. So you'll find that a lot of mentors in prison do help people with their universal assessments, which really is counterproductive. It doesn't do them any favours whatsoever. So yeah, I mean, assessments and screening for me are the way forward. I think it was Melanie that mentioned about, or Helen again had mentioned about kind of, if you like, induction. When people enter prison, we expect them to understand and to know what's expected of them in a very short amount of time. And especially when you're talking about local BCAT prisons, and the reception area of a local BCAT prison works at 2 speeds, 110,000 miles an hour or 0. And if you're trying to speak to someone about your conditions, your diversity, your mental health, your drug addiction, whatever, in that type of environment, it's not very conducive. So for me, induction should be a process. It should be a process over time that does look first and foremost at the person's health and well-being. And then they can start concentrating. And by that, I also mean assessments, screening. And it can all be done in quite a calm environment, done at the individual space, rather than in reception area where a prison officer's got about 30 seconds to deal with one person and find out whether or not they're neurodiverse and suicidal both at the same time, whilst trying to deal with someone standing next to them. So for me, it's that induction process in prison. I mean, you can take it back further, and with the latest, I believe that 80% of people leave school undiagnosed. So we're talking about the prison system where, if you like, the horse has already bolted. So really, to actually improve neurodiversity in the criminal justice system, we really do need an education system.
Fantastic. And I think this brings us to the next question. So in what ways can training of staff in the probationary and criminal system justice be improved? How do you think that people who are working in the system need to improve their skills? Would you like, Karen, would you like to comment on this one?
Yeah. We often, with our volunteers going into all the prisons, we really do want to focus on widening awareness around the needs of people that struggle with reading, because it's all too easy to take it for granted that when you thrust a piece of paper in someone's hand that they're going to be able to read that. And obviously a large proportion, we've already said, over 50% of people would struggle with that, and maybe then might act out in other ways because they want to hide the fact that they actually can't read that piece of paper, and end up in a catch-22, getting into trouble and things like that. So we often do briefing sessions with full staff teams just to kind of explain that and give them a little bit of a sense of what it might feel like not to be able to read. We do one of the exercises we do in our mental training where we kind of give it a piece of paper which they have to then decode to kind of really test out what it would feel like if you couldn't read very well. So this is something, we think across the whole criminal justice system, that would be really helpful to raise that awareness, that assumption that everybody can read well, but then also taking it that step further of understanding that there's maybe different ways of sharing information for those people who might have additional needs or neurodivergent needs as well. So it's kind of that awareness raising and training around that. But further training as well within the education provision too. I think people have recognised that perhaps there does need to be a little bit of specialist training around the teaching of reading skills and phonics as well.
Thank you so much. There are a number of questions from the people attending the session. Thomas, would you like to ask Thomas Higginson? Would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question? Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Tom Higginson. I work for Sharon Hodgson MP, who is the chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Dyslexia and other SpLDs. And I have a question in regards to this assessment appearing a little bit like a test. I've been to inside a prison for some time. I used to volunteer with prisoners using the Vocalize initiative, teaching them to debate. And my conception of them not liking a test isn't particularly clear. Would prisoners not benefit from? Okay, let me rephrase this. When we talk about demonstrating progression rather than assessing them via test, is that not a test in all but name? I'd love to know how they can demonstrate progression in other ways than sort of being given a piece of paper or some form of assessment.
Who would like from our panelists to answer this question? Thank you, Thomas. Melanie, would you like to answer the question?
I think this is the sort of thing that would likely be embedded in their sentence plan. And there's a useful concept on connected with a tool which I don't think they use anymore. The initials were CAT. I forgot what it means, and it very much looked at distance travelled. So there was there had to be an initial assessment of where somebody was up to, and then there'd be a sort of touching base to see distance travelled. But if we're talking also about staff development, the Prisoner Learning Alliance, which is it's a group of all the organisations connected with prisons arising out of the Prison Education Trust. We are producing a document which is CPD for prison staff, for prison educators, because we're aware just how little there is out there. And for the 2019 contracts, I don't know if anybody can see that, I produced a set of booklets, which is free on my website, which looks at just all aspects of prison, from the screening right through to the work preparation and resettlement. And these are available, to anybody. And one thing we're going to hit on, I think, at some stage is in-cell technology. This varies tremendously from prison to prison, and certainly in the very old prisons, certainly in the one that I go in, you can look at the virtual campus, which has been going for quite some time, where you're meant to be able to access education and various courses wherever you like. You can maybe get hold of that in education, but there's no way of doing it on the wing or doing anything in cells. So there's a lot that we need to catch up with. And finally, just moving back to induction, I think that induction needs to be a staged process, because people are very shocked sometimes when they come into prison. And an earlier session of this commission talked about adverse childhood experiences and the need for trauma-informed teaching. So all that needs to come into your second thing of improving CPD.
Thank you, Melanie. I think Karen wants to intervene here. Karen?
No, I was just going to add as well to Thomas's question, really, just from a Shannon Trust perspective, and I think that's probably where I was coming from, with the move away a little bit from testing, because I think when that report came out, recognising that there was a real need within prisons around reading, the natural impulse was to go, okay, we need to test to see how many people have this need, and then to be able to test it, we're then going to address that. And I completely understand that you do need to kind of measure that performance, that you're solving the problem, you're solving the issue. I think, however, for us, we found our approach has worked in terms of trying to take away any barriers at all. And we purposely we don't use the word test. We invite people to take part in our programs. If they don't want to start at the beginning, we kind of use what we call our progress checks to kind of find out, okay, let's see how we go with some of those. And then, you find this a little bit difficult, let's start at manual 2, start at manual 3. And we record that progression, which we can share with prisons around developing new skills by, when you've completed a manual, we know you've managed to do all these things successfully. And then you go on to the next manual, and when you completed that manual, we know you've done all those things successfully. it's a bit like how people can see how people do different job roles differently to show that they've learned and kind of taken that knowledge on board, by how well people can then read the next documents, go through the next manual, shows that they've improved and that there's that progression without having to then go back and test. But it depends on what you interpret by the word test as well. If it's in a room with other people sitting there doing a test, to one-on-one with somebody guiding you through an exercise like a screening tool, then that's slightly different, isn't it?
Thank you, Karen. I think we have a few more questions from the people in the groups. Rose, would you like to ask your question, please?
Yeah. Sorry, thank you. It's pleasure to be here today. Actually, so many insightful things coming to light. But sorry, I'm a little bit nervous because I've not really been to one of these things before. But with my experience, I have dyslexia. I had a very difficult time at school, and my understanding of where we're at with people in prisons is that they have also had a pretty rough time at school, and therefore have experienced a great deal of trauma already in their lives. Will that be at school? Will that be at home? And have spent probably decades being completely misunderstood, as many of us are that have a neurodiverse condition. I actually work with an organisation that can help both with trauma and also developing the skills required for reading. We can provide a eye tracking facility which actually shows very clearly the challenges that people face with their reading abilities and also concentration. So things like ADHD, that's something that we can really work hard to solve. I couldn't read at 15. I spent the whole of my most of my career in education being completely misunderstood and labelled lazy, and I went through this programme and it completely transformed my life to a point where I was predicted 1 GCSE and I got 8, and as a result I went on to university. So it's a bit similar situation to David's, although I really needed proper help, otherwise I'd have been completely written off, and I don't know where my life would have actually gone if I hadn't done that programme. So I'm here today really because I want to share that with people who can help to make a difference to other people's lives. I think the stats here are staggering and heartbreaking, really. We've got a tool here that we can really help with this. So Rose, I don't know.
David wants to add something for that. He sent a heart. So, David, would you like to unmute yourself and add something for what Rose just mentioned about this support that she has?
It's just what you're saying about the statistics, how sad the statistics are. But the thing is, it's not the last 6 months that these statistics have been around. It's been like this in the criminal justice system for as long as I can remember. And like Rose, it's great to be here because at least we're having a conversation. Nothing starts without having a conversation. And going back to what's going on because of the Neurodiversity Action Plan, probation are actually including neurodiversity awareness training in their PUKIP. Is it PUKIP? The probation training. So probation have also taken on board how prevalent neurodiversity in the criminal justice system is. Sorry, Rosie, I just love what you said. That was all.
Oh, thank you. I don't know who the best person here is to talk to about maybe exploring an opportunity of maybe doing a pilot of our system within a prison or several prisons to see, just to show you really how powerful it can be and life-changing for people. We've had people that are autistic go through the program and they don't say anything and they start to speak. It is powerful. It works on the root cause of a learning difficulty. So the cerebellum, which is the part of the brain that's responsible for learning, and through neuroscience, this has been something that's been developed over the last 20 years, has helped 40 to 50,000 people, but it's not enough. This is a real problem. for so many people, there is a solution out there, and we're really keen to help help as many as people as we can. The program that I'm talking about is called Zing.
Thank you, Rose. I think it's really good to know about the program, but I think that Charles Freeman also has a question that he would like to ask, because we are under so much pressure with the time, but definitely there are lots of people to connect with and discuss about the program and how you can network about it. Charles, if you would like to ask the question that you have, thank you.
Thank you, Georgia. I think these have been a tremendous series of sessions, so many thanks to Chamber and the British Dyslexia Association. I think they've been really valuable. I'm looking forward to the report at the end of it. My question is, I think if someone gets to prison, it's ultimately a huge failure of the whole public policy system. I noticed the disability strategy the government published last year put almost all its mentions of neurodiversity within the justice section, very few in other sections, but I think a more holistic approach is needed. And I was just wondering from the panel members what they thought were the kind of risk factors that could be identified early, which would signpost people who might be in trouble and might lead to interventions in the justice system, and what are the protection factors that could be put in place which would help them avoid contact with the justice systems and end up on a more positive course.
I think Melanie wants to respond to the question. Melanie, go for it.
Two groups that just go on an assembly line straight into prison, it seems to me, and one is excluded pupils. So I think those who go to pupil referral units, and it will often be because of the humiliation of being thought stupid in class, so they just play up and get kicked out. They need a gold star service, not what so many of them get at the moment. And the other is ironically called looked after children. And basically, if they do anything that in a normal circumstance is just regarded as naughty and a parent might reprimand them, very often the police are called in, and it just seems that once you're on the first step of the criminal justice ladder, it just escalates and escalates. So what I would love is the 18 billion that we spend every single year on reoffending to get redirected. And there was a report, what must it be, 20 years ago, called Justice Reinvestment, that says exactly this, that somehow we could save all this money and just redirect it to these vulnerable young people and protect them from ever getting into prison, which does cost £43,000 per person per year. I mean, think of a hospital, if that was the outcome of patients in hospital as far as getting better, and then you think of the reoffending rates, you're in prison and you don't, instead of being rehabilitated, you reoffend.
Thank you, Melanie. I think Karen wants to add a little bit on this one.
And yeah, just to add as well, that falling out of education, that does seem to be key from what we hear from some of our learners. And that can be a range of different issues as well. It can also be from long-term sickness, from caring to family members, any kind of interrupted schooling, moving around for whatever reason. All of those things can help people, can make people fall out of education for a bit, and then when they go back in, feel that they are behind, suddenly start developing this view of themselves as not able to learn, or thick or stupid, or things that perhaps negatively they might have heard people say about them. And that really compounds within a person's self-belief on what they feel of themselves, to the point where they take them away from that situation in future environments. So in future, you would not maybe want to go into a classroom environment. We talk sometimes about educational trauma, that real experience that people can have of being made to feel quite small and very negative, and then needing to take away that experience, and they'll do their best to hide away from that and find other ways. So my protective factor would be on that is finding that right way of helping that individual at the point that they need that, whether that's around their specialist support around neurodivergent conditions, support around those other factors that led to that interrupted schooling at an early age as soon as possible. We work with people in the YOIs as well, so the younger age group too, and see the same kind of issues there as well. So the protective factor means finding a way to help that person learn that works right for them, but having that support in place that they don't have that interrupted schooling ideally as well. So
Thank
yeah,
you.
that's my point of it.
Yeah, we have quite a few questions from the people on the call currently, and we just have 9 additional minutes. So I'm going to ask Nassir to ask your question, please.
Thank you. I'm a dyslexic adult and I'm from the ethnic minority. I can sympathize with the other person who was just talking before and have empathy, because I had a very bad experience at school. Called teachers calling me stupid and saying I'm never going to achieve anything in my life. So because of that bad experience, I left school with barely passing my GCSEs and going on and then working. And then while I was at work, my employers encouraging me to go back into education, and at that point did an access course, and the teacher picked up that I had dyslexia, and at that point I had relief that, you know, there isn't, you know, I'm not stupid, I'm not silly, there is something there. And as soon as that was diagnosed, I've gone to university and I've done my degree, I've done my master's, and done a SENCO course. And now while I was I've qualified as a teacher, as a science teacher, but what my experience working in schools has not been very good as well. And especially now, I've over the last 10 years, I've been working in special needs schools. And again, I haven't been supported by the school themselves, although they're supporting special needs kids. When it came to the staff who were dyslexic like myself, and not getting support, and made my life very difficult. In my previous job, I was basically pushed out of my job. And this one again, when I asked for reasonable adjustments, the same thing was sort of spiraling again. Which I think is unfortunate, although they are fully aware. And I'll tell you, to the extent that I'm working as a teaching assistant, although they're fully aware that I'm a qualified teacher with a master's in school improvement and leadership and special needs and autism, and I've got a SENCO qualification, and I'm going on to do a dyslexia literacy postgraduate course. But what I'm trying to say is that I'm having to work so much more harder, and I'm hitting my head against the brick wall. And then you have these other people who are in prison, and it must be even doubly hard for them. That's what I'm trying. So it's a shame, but this is what it is. And I think people have this misnomer that, oh, okay, I'm going to disclose to my employers about my disability, and I'll have them on board. Unfortunately, it's not just me. I have spoken to other people, have not had such a positive impact, and that's why I wanted to bring that out and let other people know about it.
Thank you, Nassir. What you are just telling us, it is a reality for many people, to be honest, and you are totally right that people with dyslexia, frequently they need to work harder than the neurotypical people to achieve. You are totally right. Thank you for that. David, would you like to add something? We have only 5 minutes, so I will just take questions for the last part. David?
Yeah, for me, on what we were just talking about there, the school to prison pipeline, in 2012, the University of Edinburgh, something slightly off topic, but in 2012, the University of Edinburgh conducted some research into the overcrowding of Scottish prisons. And after their research, they concluded that the best way to reduce the overcrowding of Scottish prisons is to cut school exclusions. School exclusions are a surefire way, virtually, of someone seeing themselves in the criminal justice system. Once again, the criminal justice system is too late. It's the horse has already bolted. This really does come back to the education system, and the fact that our education system is still failing children in 2022, because children are leaving school undiagnosed. They're being excluded from school because of their conditions. They're being excluded and classed as special needs into other schools with other children with needs. So therefore they don't get to spend time around neurotypical children. So for me, if we really do and are serious about neurodiversity in the criminal justice system, we have to start with the education system, simple as that.
Exactly.
Or we will never ever see an end to it in the criminal justice system.
Melanie, would you like to jump in and say something? Because I can see you raising your hand.
No, I wasn't raising my hand. I'm putting my thumb up.
Yes, exactly. You're totally agreeing.
Yes, I'll just I'll come out because there's some people who want to ask questions.
Fantastic. So, Pat, would you like to ask your question, please?
Yeah, what I want to raise, I manage a disability charity in Suffolk, and the group that we come across the most, both from, which is equally relevant to both sections that we've had this afternoon, is a group of people who weren't picked up in school because it was before there was any assessments in school. They went to school or did most of their schooling before the Special Educational Needs and the Warnock Report and the relevant Education Act came into force. And yes, they do go back in prisons because we do actually do some work with the prison, and we meet them there. And they tend to say then that getting help that late in their lives is such a big hurdle to start learning to read that they're not very successful at it. It's not that there isn't been help for them. Similarly, trying to get back into work because the jobs that they used to do have gone. So this would occur for a prisoner leaving prison, like manufacturing, where you learnt a little bit of the process and it never changed. The high-tech world that's got so high-tech that actually assistive software can't be loaded onto their systems because they're designed to be one main system at the head office, and the rest is just terminals, not personal computers. But they seem to be sort of airbrushed out a bit. So I'm just shouting for them and raising that issue.
You're totally right, Pat. There are so many different factors that will affect the individual's motivation and eagerness to learn and succeed, isn't it? Especially with literacy, and especially when you are not a young child learning phonics, but you are an older person who needs to learn about the world, not only about how to connect the sounds and the letters. Keisha, we will take your question last, and then we will have to wrap up everything and conclude. I'm sorry, the time passed so quickly. Keisha, if you would like to unmute yourself and ask your question, and then we close off with our discussion today.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's been really interesting listening to the conversation this evening. But what I wanted to say is, as much as we're talking about inclusion and diversity and everything else, what I've noticed within the space as a Black woman, my experience is so different from somebody else who may be white or from another background. I was born in Jamaica, came to the UK at 14. My experience is so much different, but what I'm not seeing in the dyslexia space and the neurodiversity space is more representation from the Black community of us sharing our lived experience and sharing our story. You're talking about the prison, the prison pipeline, and there's so many, majority of quite a high percentage of people in the prison is from the Black community, but I'm not seeing a massive focus on that area. And it has become very frustrating where, you're having a panel discussion about all of these things. There should be a representation from the Black community, because if I cannot see it, I cannot be it. And that's just my comment right now.
Kisa, you are totally right about it. And definitely the British Dyslexia Association, who is hosting the events, and the Chamber will take this one into account. So there will be follow-up sessions that will be even more inclusive and even more diverse, that include also people from different races and ethnic minorities, but also the fact that I am chairing the session and I am a bilingual person is evidence that there is a lot of inclusion and, need to understand the needs of all the people, and definitely each person is different. Thank you so much for attending the session today about the criminal justice. I think that we needed additional hours to discuss this topic, and I'm sure we won't be able to exhaust it. But anyway, I would like to thank our panelists, David, Karen, and Melanie, for their experience and their insightful comments and suggestions, and I'm sure people will get a lot out of this.